Welcome back to Psychology 650. I'm Dr. Harry Beeman, and the purpose of this video is to take a look at the American Psychological Association reference citations. In this particular video, we'll take a look at the importance of reference. We'll take a look at how to document an internet reference, book reference, journal reference, video reference, as well as to how to incorporate the use of multiple authors or two references in the same year. In addition, I'll show you how to document a reference page. And to begin with, we'll take a look at why references are important. Literary references let the readers know where you got the material from. It also lets them know where they can go if they want to read more about the material. Academic and professional writing is quite different from all other forms of communication. For example, my opinion, without clear reference to my experience in this field, is not acceptable. If I can't demonstrate experience, I certainly must show a reference. All of my writing, for example, is supported by either a reference to my experience or a literary reference. You'll need to back up your own words relative to psychological principles by either references or by clearly stating where you obtain the information. For example, this is something that I would write. After working with Vietnam veterans suffering from PTSD over the course of the past 30 years, I have noticed a very clear trend to self-medicate insomnia with alcohol. So, here I have clearly demonstrated from where I obtained my knowledge and experience. If I simply wrote, in my opinion, without showing a reference to my experience or a literary reference, I would not be taken seriously by my colleagues, and I could be cited for plagiarism. So let's start by looking at the use of internet references. Use the formats that I'm going to show you for all material quoted directly or paraphrased from the internet. And as a matter of fact, most of what you're going to use for your papers are probably going to come from internet sources. The simplest way to document an APA formatted reference is the use of the internet reference. So, internet references with only one author. You start off at the far left hand and you put the author's last name, a comma, their initial, and a period. If there's more than one initial, then put more than one initial, but make sure you put periods between. Then you put the date by citing the year, the month, and the day. If you only have the year, you just simply cite the year, and I'll show you how that looks a little bit later. Then there's a period, and then the title of the work. In this case, it's personal, professional, and social ethics. Notice this, that only the first word is capitalized, and the title of the work is in italics, with a period followed by retrieved from, with the full URL. If you don't put the full URL, the reader won't know how to get to that material. So it's important that you put the full URL, and do not put retrieved from and then the date that you retrieved it from. That's no longer appropriate use of APA format. The other thing to notice is that the date of the article, 2008, August 9, represents the date the article was published, not the date that you retrieved it. If there was no date for this article, the citation would look like this. So in the date block, I would put N period D period. Stands for no date. An in-text citation for this could look one of two different ways. I could write, for example, according to Weber, parentheses, no date, psychologists who engage in therapies they have not been formally trained for are unethical and subject to a wide range of civil penalties. Okay, I could also write the same thing by putting the citation for the author at the end. So, psychologists who engage in therapies they have not been formally trained for are unethical and subject to a wide range of civil penalties. Parentheses, last name, comma, no date, parentheses, period. Notice the period goes after the citation and not at the end of the sentence. Now, if this were a direct quote, of course we would use quotation marks. What's important for when you look at quotation marks is that the period does not go after the sentence. The period again goes after the citation. Some people make the mistake of putting the period between the S, for example, and the quotation mark. That's an error. Okay? But always use quotation marks. And anytime you use quotation marks, you must reference a citation. If not, the university would hold you in violation of their principles of plagiarism. An internet reference with two authors would look like this. Last name, the initials with a comma, and then the ampersand. And then again the last names and initials. Notice that in none of these cases do I put PhD, MD, Mr., anything like that. It's just simply the last name and the initials. But when you have more than one author, it's a comma and an ampersand, and then you continue. An in-text citation of this would look like this. For this example, it would be, according to Pope and Keith Spiegel, no date for the reference, and then the rest of the paraphrase of their material. Okay? Now I could also put the reference at the end. And in this case, non-sexual bounding crossings can enrich psychotherapy, serve the treatment plan, and strengthen the therapist-client working relationship with Pope and Keith Spiegel Smith, no date. Notice that there's a use of an ampersand in this case. Outside of the parentheses, it's and. Inside the parentheses, it's an ampersand. If this was a direct quote, again, you're going to be using quotation marks. Notice that the period does not go after the sentence, it goes after the citation. Again, you have to have the citation for every single direct quote. So, an internet reference with more than two authors. So this is how that format would go. If in this example it's Miller, comma, P period, M period, comma, Commons, comma, M period, L period, comma, ampersand, Guthiel, comma, and then the rest of the citation. Okay, so it's important to notice that when I'm using an ampersand, when there's more than two, I've got a comma between the second and the third author. Okay? Also notice that when I'm writing out the title of the article, it's all italicized. It's lowercase words except for words that have to be capitalized, like in this case, Brazil and the United States. We'll talk more about capitalization as we go along. The in-text citation could look like this. I could put the authors at the front, or I could put the authors in a different format altogether using et al. Let me show you. So in this one, according to Miller, Commons, and Guthiel, notice I'm using and because this is not inside of a parentheses. I'm using the word and. Although there has been considerable discussion of boundary excursions in clinical patient relationships, little empirical research exists. Now, because there's more than two authors, I can use et al. So the way it goes is this. And in this example, according to Miller, comma, et al, period. And I can use et al instead of having to write out Commons and Guthiel again. Okay, but it has to be more than two authors. I can't do it for just two authors. Another way to take a look at this is to use the authors at the end. And again, it's Miller, Commons, comma, and with an ampersand because it's inside of the parentheses, Guthiel. Or at the end, I could also use et al. I could go Miller, et al, period, comma, with the year, because there's more than two authors. Perfectly acceptable to do it either way. If this were a direct quote, again, the same thing. And you'll notice here I'm choosing to use Miller, comma, and et al. Instead of writing the whole thing out. And in this example, the same thing. I choose to write et al. I like keeping things simple. AP allows you to do that, so why not keep it simple? And here's the format for up to 6 authors. This format gets a little bit tricky because it varies from book to journals to videos. So the best thing to do when you run into a situation when you have a format with more than 6 authors is to drop me a note. Best thing to do is to put it directly in to the APA format support thread on the main forum. That way everyone can get a chance to review not only your question but my response to it. So what do you do when the internet reference has an organization for an author? In other words, there's no person, it's just an organization. Well, let's take an example of the Williams Institute. So here it's the Williams Institute for Ethics and Management with the year that it was published. The title is in italicized and only the first letter is capitalized. You'll notice that the 6th edition is not italicized, okay? And so I can use the Institute as the author when I don't have the specific name of an author. Here's a couple more examples. The University of Phoenix, the year, the title in italics, and where it was retrieved from. Okay? Again, the Arizona Department of Health Services, the year, this time I have a month because they provide a month, and then the title, and then where it was retrieved from. So in a general format, you got the author, you got the year that it was published. Sometimes it has a month, sometimes it has a date. But the second line and the third line and all subsequent lines are indented 5 to 7 spaces. All right, so that covers internet references. Let's take a look at book references. And again, you would use a book reference in a paper when you actually had the book in hand. More times than not, your references are going to be coming from the internet. But in case you have a book that you actually have in hand, you use these formats. Starting off with a book with one author. So here's the author's last name, the initials, the year again. The title of the book is italicized. It is in a format where only the first letter of the title is capitalized. And again, the edition is not capitalized. Then with books, next comes the city where it was published, the state where it was published, and then who published it. In this case, the American Psychological Association. Okay? So again, notice the title of the book is not capitalized, but is italicized, except for the edition number. Okay? And that all the material after the first line is indented. An in-text citation will look like this. According to Versoff, 2008, the most difficult ethical dilemma related to professional psychology involves the dual relationship. Another way of writing the very same thing is to write it out, but put the author at the end in parentheses. Again, the period goes after the citation. If this were a direct quote, again, always use quotation marks. In the case of a book, there are page numbers. You have to specify what page you retrieve the material from. So you'll notice that at the end of the quotation I've got parentheses with P period 122, denoting that this material comes from this author on this page. Okay? A different way of doing this is put the author at the end, parentheses, author, year, page number, denoted by a single P. If this reference spanned more than one page, the pages would be denoted with 2 P's, not 1. So how about a book where the author is also the publisher? In this case, we have the American Psychological Association, published in 2010. The title of the publication is Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association. Notice that manual's not capitalized, just the first letter, and anything with a professional title would also be capitalized. So American Psychological Association gets capitalized, but the edition number does not get italicized. Again, you have the city and the state. But instead of writing the American Psychological Association all over again, you just simply put the word author. A book with 2 authors, in this case, Pope, K.S., and Vasquez, MJT, the year of publication, and then the title of the book. The only thing that's different here is that we're using an ampersand. We have a comma, and then an ampersand for the next author. Everything else is relatively the same. An in-text citation for two authors would look like this. According to Pope and Vasquez, and notice that I'm using the word "and" because it's not in parentheses, it's in the text. According to Pope and Vasquez, 2007, professional ethics emphasize the therapist's understanding of his or her effect on the life of the patient, and on and on and on. Another way of writing the very same thing is to put the authors at the end. And I put the authors at the end, but I have to make sure that when I'm inside of the parentheses that I use the ampersand. And again, if it were a direct quote, I would use quotation marks. Because it's inside of a book, I'm going to have a page number, so I have to list the page number. If this reference spanned more than one page of the text, again, I have to use P period to denote that there's more than one page. How about the chapter of an edited book? Sometimes you want to refer to just one chapter out of a book. This is how you would document that using APA format. So in this example, I got Baker, FM, ampersand, Lightfoot, last initials, the year of publication, and then the title of the chapter, Psychiatric Care of Ethnic Elders. Notice that it's not all capitalized. Notice that it's not italicized. I have a period. And now I'm going to show what book it comes from. In A. C. Ga, who is the editor, in parentheses, and then the title of the book. Culture, ethnicity, and mental illness. Notice that only the first letter of the title is italicized. And because it's in a book, I'm going to show the page numbers for the chapter of that particular book. A period, the city, the state, and then who edited the book, or published the book, rather. A book with more than two authors. Okay? Now we've got three authors. So we've got Campbell, comma, L period, comma, Vasquez, comma, and then MJT, comma, Benke, S. And then before we get to the very last author, we use the ampersand. Okay? We've got the year, we've got the title of the book, we've got where it was published and who published it. So the only difference here is that I'm throwing in an ampersand just before the last author. The in-text citation would look like this. I could write Campbell, Vasquez, Benke, and Kirchhoff encourage psychologists to, and on and on and on. And I make sure that I put the year of the publication after the last author. I could also write, because it's more than two authors, I can use the first author's last name with et al. Again, keeping it simple. I don't have to list every single author if there's more than two, and the APA allows for that. So again, keep it simple. If this were a direct quote, again, we use quotation marks, we denote the page number. Another way of doing it is to put the source of the citation at the end. And again, if I want to write out all of the authors I can, or I could put Campbell, comma, et al., comma, 2009, page 114. Your choice. APA allows you to do it either way. Personally, I like to keep it simple. Another way of looking at the same thing, what I just described, was using the et al. Instead of the entire list of authors in the beginning, and again how to do that at the end. And then if this also spanned more than one page of the text, I would have to make sure that I use two P's to denote more than one page of the text. All right, so we've looked at internet references and book references. Now let's look at something pulled from a journal article. So a journal article with one author. This is a little bit different than what you've seen so far. Let me describe. So I've got the last name and the initials of the author, I've got the year, and I've got the month. And then I'm going to have the title of the article. The title of the article is not italicized, and it is not all capitalized. Only the first letter of the first word is capitalized. However, the title of the periodical, the title of the journal, is italicized and capitalized. In addition to that, it may be hard to see here, but the edition itself is also italicized. Okay? So the name of the magazine, the name of the journal, the name of the publication is capitalized, and so is the edition number. We have a comma, and then we have the pages that it spans, page 52 to page 54. Notice that I don't put a P here. Again, when you do a journal article in APA format, it's quite different. I would say that it makes it a little bit difficult to try to remember the differences between a book, an internet, and a journal article. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have this journal article in your hand. You're going to be pulling it off the internet, so please use the internet format. Keeps it much, much simpler. So your in-text citation would look like this for the journal article according to Wright 2006. Same format that we used before. I can denote the author up front with the year, or I can denote the author and the year at the end, but I have to use parentheses. The period goes after the citation, not at the end of the sentence. Again, if this were a direct quote, I'd have to make sure that I use page numbers, because journals have page numbers. The reason we don't do that for the internet is most things that are posted on the internet don't have page numbers. Okay, and again, if you have multiple pages, use the PP to denote more than one page. A journal article with 2 authors goes like this. In this example, Youngren and Harris with an ampersand. The year, Can You Keep a Secret? Confidentiality in Psychotherapy. Notice a couple of things. The title of the article is not italicized, but anytime after a question mark in the title or the use of a colon, the next word is capitalized. Again, the journal title is capitalized and it is italicized, and so is the edition number. You'll notice that the volume number is not italicized, neither are the page numbers. The in-text citation, again, this looks very, very familiar. When I'm outside of the parentheses, I use and. When I'm inside the parentheses, I use an ampersand. Again, a direct quote, always use quotation marks. If you don't use quotation marks and you quote somebody directly, you could be cited for plagiarism. If you forget to use a reference, again, you could be cited for plagiarism. Not a very pleasant experience. Once again, if it spanned more than one page, you use the PP designation to denote that it's more than one page, and you show the page numbers. All right, so this is a little different. We have a journal article with more than 2 but less than 7 authors. Okay, so we would have the authors listed until we get to the very last author, and then we insert the ampersand just before the last author. Okay? That's the only difference. The in-text citation is relatively the same. You'll notice because I have more than 2 authors, I can denote it with et al. Instead of writing out Donner, Vandercook, Zorick, and Fisher, I just Donner, comma, et al. Boom, I'm done. Another way of looking at the same thing, using page numbers, using citations for multiple page numbers. The important thing is, if it's a direct quote, use quotation marks. A journal article could have 7 or more authors. This gets a little bit tricky. You don't run into this all the time, but you will occasionally. So list out all the authors up to the 6th. Immediately after the 6th, put the ampersand and 3 dots, and then the last author. So if this had 25 authors, and I've seen a couple of times when that happens, you do it all the way up to the 6th, you put an ampersand, dot, 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 and then the very last author. Otherwise, the rest of the format doesn't change. If you have questions about any of these citation processes for APA format, make sure you send me a note. Make sure you do it in the main form so that everyone can take advantage of that. This material is not easy to learn. In-text citation, again, I recommend using et al. Instead of listing out all the different authors. Again, a direct quote, use quotation marks, make sure that you include the page number. If it's multiple pages, make sure you use PP. Okay, what happens when you have an author who has 2 publications in the same year? And this happens quite a bit. So here's an example. You have Dr. Zur, so you put Zur O, and then for the year you put 2011A, then the title in italics, HIPAA Compliance Kit, 4th edition, San Francisco, California, Zur Institute. Now for the second use of Zur in 2011, you put B, and then you put the title and where it was published and by whom. So this way the reader would be able to tell when they're reading through the article which of these particular references are they using. For example, I could write according to Zur, and then the reference comes from 2011A. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, is a landmark piece of federal legislation designed to protect both the client and practitioner. Okay? And the same thing when I use B. I'm letting the reader know that if they want to read more about this particular paraphrase quotation, this material, then they should go to the reference page and look at the one that says Zur 2011A, and that'll show them how to get to that material. A video. You do have videos for this course. If you want to cite a video, the format is as follows. You put the author or the organization that did the video, the year the video was published. In this case, it's bipolar disorder, shifting moods, mood swings. You'll notice this. The title of the video is italicized, and the first letter after the colon is capitalized. And then you put retrieve from, making sure that you use the full URL. Now, we also have to use a reference page. So let me show you an example of a reference page using a couple of the references that we've talked about thus far. A reference page, it always has the word references centered at the top of the next page. You don't start references double-spaced after the end of your conclusion. You always go to the next page, start references. It's not italicized, it's not in bold, it's just simply centered on the page. References themselves are in alphabetical order with the following format. You always start at the left margin, and your first line goes all the way to where you can't do anymore, and then you come to your second and your third and your subsequent lines, and you always indent 5 to 7 spaces. Make sense? And then again, showing that you could have an author with multiple publications in the same year, and you're showing the reader where to go for that material. Any questions about reference pages, please post those in the APA support thread in the main forum. So in review, we've covered a lot of material. We talked a little bit about why references are important. We differentiated between internet, book, journal, and video references. We talked about what to do when you have multiple authors, authors who are institutions. We looked at the reference page, and we concluded by discussing the importance of using the APA support thread in the main forum for any questions that you might have. Again, you're not going to be the only person with these questions. This material is not easy. So post your questions and we can all learn together on how to do APA format appropriately. The next video covers the Learning Team Charter. Thank you.